The first Caricom-Africa summit was held this Tuesday, aimed at promoting closer collaboration between Africa, the African diaspora, and the Caribbean. Industrial workers in Uruguay mobilized on Tuesday against privatization and in favor of better pay and conditions. The Taliban named a caretaker cabinet on Tuesday, dominated by members of the group's old guard, including a UN-sanctioned veteran. The announcement came after protests in the capital and other cities. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your host, Gladys Quesada, and now we begin with the news. The historic first Caricom-Africa summit was held this Tuesday, aimed at strengthening economic and integration ties between the two regions. The summit was chaired by the President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, as host country. Kenyatta stated that African and Caribbean countries have enormous potential to foster innovative partnerships in the so-called blue economy. With a theme, unity across continents and oceans, opportunities for deepening integration, leaders who participated in the event noted that it not only sought to contribute to boosting trade and investment opportunities between Africa and the Caribbean, but also to increase solidarity to address global challenges such as access to vaccines against COVID-19 and the economic development. President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, spoke on the historic occasion of the summit regarding the spirit of the event.
We must become the architects of our common future, where Africa and the Caribbean are joined together by a common goal of ensuring that our peoples have prosperity.
During her speech to the summit, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Amor Marley, referred to the African heritage present in the Caribbean cultures, stressing that this represents a strong and unbreakable bond between both regions, separated by the Atlantic Ocean.
This is where we have to carry our people. Your continent is our ancestral home, and we are related to you, as I just heard from Prime Minister Rowley, in so many ways, because Africa is in us. And we're not simply from Africa.
In his remarks at the first Caricom-Africa summit, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Keith Rowley, praised the timeless relations between Africa and the Caribbean.
Our work began in November last year, and it became immediately apparent that we would, even with all the money, it would not be possible to buy vaccines because they had already been hoarded by the major countries.
Gaston Brownie, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, also addressed important issues of common interest during the summit, which was held via video conference and streamed live on several online platforms.
And almost 60% of North Americans are fully vaccinated. Only 3% of Africans can say the same. This pattern of inequity is obvious in its ugliness and prevalence. Therefore, we must act together to change it.
The historic first Caricom-Africa summit was not only attended by heads of state, also present were prominent leaders of industry and other sectors. Strive Maziwiya, a businessman from Zimbabwe leading the technology group Econet Global, shared his thoughts about the vaccine crisis affecting both regions.
Our work began in November last year, and it became immediately apparent that we would, even with all the money, it would not be possible to buy vaccines because they had already been hoarded by the major countries.
And now we address other topics. According to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the death toll due to COVID-19 across the continent has now surpassed 200,000, while the lack of vaccines means the end of the pandemic is a long way off for Africa. South Africa, Morocco, Tunisia and Ethiopia are among the countries with the most cases registered in the continent. In terms of the caseload, Southern Africa is the most affected region, followed by the northern and eastern parts of the continent, while Central Africa is the least affected region, according to official figures. After several deadly months, including some 27,000 deaths in July and 26,000 in August, the pandemic appears to be easing somewhat on the continent. Current daily case figures are around 600 compared to almost 1,000 in late July, marking a record for the region. And Venezuela received the first batch of over 693,000 COVID-19 vaccine doses acquired through the COVAX mechanism this Tuesday. This shipment is the first of almost 12 million doses that Venezuela is scheduled to receive through this global mechanism, which were delayed where payments by Venezuela were blocked due to the U.S. sanctions. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez held a video conference this Tuesday with the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, where she thanked him for his help in resolving critical issues regarding the arrival of the vaccines to the country. She also stressed that her government is committed to complementing the vaccination program as soon as possible. We'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back From the South. Uruguay's Federation of Industrial Unions mobilized on Tuesday against privatization and also in favor of better pay and conditions. We have more in the following report by our correspondent Mateo Grille.
By the cold and grey morning, hundreds of workers from industrial unions of Uruguay gathered outside the city hall of Montevideo to begin a demonstration that, among other things, focused on the defense of labor rights and jobs in light of a new round of wage negotiations. In the context of the defense of labor, of employment, of the need of greater public investment, of greater investment in national industry, obviously rejecting this process of cuts that has taken place and the downsizing of the state. In defense of wages, because in Uruguay, a loss of earnings has been imposed on public and private sector workers as part of the 8th round, and now a 9th round of wage negotiations is being proposed, which also imposes a fall in earnings for workers. The different industry sector unions held a work stoppage for half a day to denounce employers' intentions of further wage cuts and corporate restructuring. This is what the workers of the multinational dairy company Lactalis had to say. The situation that today arises at the company level is to introduce the idea that there is a crisis in the industry, even though we say that there is no crisis. For this reason, they use these excuses to close plants and send people into unemployment, and also the massive restructuring that they are carrying out. In response to government and company proposals to cut wages and working conditions, workers stressed that they had different strategy. We follow another line, another strategy to promote an in-depth integration of Latin America, to promote productive complementarity, to diversify the country's productive model, to develop quality, intense labor relations in terms of rights and wages, to increase national production through the public procurement system with high-quality products, let's say, with a concept of competitiveness that is not only about cutting costs and the deterioration of people's living standards. At the end of March, a rally was held in front of the Ministry of Labor where the role of the state in achieving social justice was defended.
We are defending the role of the state as a key actor regarding social justice in a country like ours, which is not going to be driven by any private capital. The proof is that during the entire pandemic, those who increased their profits, far from sharing this wealth with the people, far from improving conditions, far from being supportive, far from that, they move all the capital abroad, and those who pay for the situation were the workers who have always been the mainstay of the nation.
Union demands will continue and will probably intensify. Next week, there will be a 24-hour general strike organized by the Confederation of Workers of Uruguay, and in a few weeks, a new round of negotiations will start at the Wage Council, where the workers will fight to avoid a further fall in their purchasing power.
Mateo Grille, Telesur, Montevideo, Uruguay.
Thank you, Mateo, for these informations. And now we move on. Brazil saw protests in over 200 cities on its Independence Day this Tuesday. Broad sectors mobilized against far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, while his supporters marched on the Supreme Court and Congress. The National Out with Bolsonaro campaign, which brings together a range of social movements, political parties and trade unions, organized mobilizations to reject Bolsonaro's policies and to demand his impeachment. This Tuesday marks the 199th anniversary of the proclamation of Brazil's independence, and the occasion was used by both opponents and supporters of Bolsonaro, the government, to take to the streets. Bolsonaro had called on his supporters to rally outside the Supreme Court as part of his long-running attacks on several Supreme Court judges that he claimed have acted against him. Bolsonaro, whose popularity is at an all-time low, sought on show of force in the face of a flagging economy, soaring unemployment and inflation, and a series of investigations targeting him and his inner circle. And as mentioned, Brazil's far-right President Jair Bolsonaro called for 1 million of his supporters to travel to the country's capital, Brasilia, to protest against the Supreme Court this Tuesday. Tens of thousands showed up, but the court continued operating as usual. Our correspondent, Brian Muir, reports.
For months, Jair Bolsonaro and his followers have been threatening to shut down the Brazilian Supreme Court after it authorized a series of corruption investigations against the beleaguered president and his family. Last week, President Bolsonaro and his backers called for 1 million people to come to Brasilia, the capital, to protest in front of the Supreme Court on September 7th, Brazilian Independence Day. Turnout was big, but it was a lot lower than expected, and the court remained open.
Brazil is in crisis. Inflation and unemployment are skyrocketing. People are going hungry, and the government is taking the luxury of calling for street protests. It spent a lot of money to incite criminal acts based on goals from military dictatorship, like interventions against government institutions like the Supreme Court.
Hundreds of trucks and buses, many bankrolled by right-wing politicians connected to agribusiness, arrived in the capital, mainly from the conservative Brazilian North and Midwest. The Bolsonaros may have managed to put tens of thousands of people on the streets, but many of them seemed confused about why they were there.
We are criminalizing communism, the toga communism of the Federal Supreme Court, which is implanting communism in our country and censoring our freedom. And this is why we support Bolsonaro. We are against the criminalization of the toga.
It may have been the largest protest in Brasilia in 4 years, but the fact that it was smaller than expected and that turnout was even lower in other cities shows how the multiple crises underway in Brazil are eroding the far-right government's support. Brian Muir, Telesur, Brasilia.
Thank you, Brian, for this report. And now we continue. Mexico's Supreme Court unanimously ruled that penalizing abortion is unconstitutional this Tuesday. The decision is expected to set precedent for the legal status of abortion nationwide and represents a victory for women's rights.
From now on, it will not be possible, without violating the criteria of the court and the Constitution, to prosecute any woman who has an abortion in the cases that we have considered valid by this constitutional court. I believe that this regulation is stigmatizing for women and for pregnant people. It is discriminatory, and I think it is delicate and incongruous to leave it in place.
At least 16 patients died when flooding hit a hospital in central Mexico, disrupting the power supply. The facility in the state of Hidalgo was inundated after a river overflowed following heavy rain. General Director of the Mexican Institute of Social Security, Zoe Robledo, said the hospital was flooded in a matter of minutes. And a power cut disrupted oxygen treatment, which was needed by some of the victims, including COVID-19 patients under oxygen therapy to stay alive. The rest of the patients were evacuated and taken to other hospitals. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Tuesday, the Taliban announced a caretaker cabinet granting key positions to the group's old guard, including a UN-sanctioned veteran. Prior to the announcement of the new cabinet on Tuesday, the Taliban dispersed a protest in Kabul, firing against a crowd and arresting journalists and other civilians. Several people were reported to have been injured. Protests also took place in different cities of Afghanistan, expressing support for the resistance to the Taliban and criticizing the alleged Pakistani support for the recent military offensive against resistance forces in the northern province of Panjshir. Thousands of women also demonstrated in the streets of Kabul and the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif, calling for the inclusion in Afghan politics. In particular, they called for representation in the next government. The cabinet announcements have so far not included any women.
Why are our women not included in the political issues? When they say we are having talks and they are voting for the formation of the new government, there is no any women anywhere in their voting campaign. Why they don't want to have a woman as a representative of all women in their voting and talks or to participate? We demand the creation of secure jobs, both for women and men, and on the rights to participate in politics for women, the rights of election and selection of women to leadership positions, the right to private ownership, working rights for women in the judicial and legal sector, the right to freedom of speech, and the comments of ideas of women must be safe. The upcoming new government must release a clear description of women's rights in the Charter of the Islamic Emirate.
United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with Qatar's Emir and other top officials in Doha for talks on Afghanistan, shortly after the Taliban claimed to have taken full control of the country. Blinken and Austin are the most senior U.S. officials to visit the Gulf since the Taliban's rapid seizure of Afghanistan in August. The U.S. Secretary of State said no country had done more than Qatar during the U.S. military withdrawal and evacuation efforts from Afghanistan. Qatar's foreign minister, meanwhile, said Qatari teams were continuing to work towards reopening Kabul International Airport, which the Taliban took control of when U.S. troops left on August 30th. Qatar, which housed a major U.S. airbase, housed peace talks with the Taliban, which opened an office in Doha in 2013 with tacit permission from the United States. During his meeting with the Qatari Emir, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said that the Taliban had reiterated a pledge to allow Afghans to freely leave Afghanistan.
We've also been engaging with the Taliban on this topic, including in recent hours. They've said that they will let people with travel documents freely depart. We will hold them to that. So will dozens of other countries. The international community is watching to see if the Taliban will live up to their commitments. All told, this has been a remarkable outpouring of support under incredibly challenging circumstances and a powerful testament to the world of Qatar's generosity and statesmanship.
The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization warned that instability in Afghanistan is threatening winter food crops, aggravating existing food insecurity.
Basic services in Afghanistan are collapsing, and food and other life-saving aid is about to run out. As we heard, the Secretary General has warned of a humanitarian catastrophe. We urge international donors to support this appeal fast and generously.
We are talking already, even before the events that have unfolded in recent weeks during the month of August, we're talking about a situation where
1 in 3 Afghans are acutely food insecure, a situation that's dramatic by any stretch of the imagination.
And the search continues after 6 Palestinians escaped from a high-security Israeli prison on Monday, leaving the regime red-faced and sparking celebrations in the streets by Palestinians. Israeli authorities acknowledge that they have no clue regarding the whereabouts of the Palestinians, who escaped through a tunnel in one of the Gilboa prison's bathrooms. Gilboa, which opened in 2004 during the second Palestinian Intifada or uprising, is a high-security site where hundreds of Palestinians are detained. Meanwhile, the Israeli policy of mass incarceration of Palestinians, including children, without trial and in poor conditions, continue to spark international condemnation. There are currently almost 5,000 Palestinians held in Israeli prisons, including over 200 children. The Chinese government has rejected claims by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's Secretary General that Beijing is building new nuclear missile launch facilities. Spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Wang Wenbin, expressed concern over the exaggerated claims by NATO, the Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, that China represents an expanding nuclear threat. The Foreign Ministry official noted that Beijing's defensive strategy in this area includes keeping its nuclear arsenal at the minimum level. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurienglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us for social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.